From one mind comes duality, but cling not even to this one. Sangsong has an uncanny ability to predict the tendencies of the mind, and then to counteract those tendencies. In the previous couplets, Sangsong has spoken of abandoning duality. The natural tendency would lead us to think that Sangsong would like us to adopt the view of the oneness of all things. But here, just as we begin to consider the gesture of oneness, Sangsong tells us not cling even to this one. Notice that in an earlier couplet, which reads, "Just calmly see that all means one, and by themselves false views vanish," Sangsong recommends oneness as an antidote to the agitated mind which constantly chooses and rejects. Yet here, Sangsong advises us to release attachment to oneness. This points to the progressive nature of the poem. Just as in the Heart Sutra, as I have previously noted, the term emptiness undergoes a development so that at one point the sutra states that form and emptiness do not differ, while at a later point asserting that in emptiness we find no form. So Sangsong at one point uses oneness as an antidote to a deluded condition of mind. Then later, here at this couplet, Sangsong points to oneness itself as a source of delusion. Sangsong uses oneness as a skillful means in a particular situation, but warns us against harboring oneness as a view, warns us against clinging to oneness as a metaphysical construct. Why does Sangsong warn us against clinging to oneness? In a very subtle suggestion, Sangsong states that from one mind comes duality. In other words, dualism, which Sangsong so thoroughly and consistently warns us against, emerges from oneness. How does this happen? Oneness stands in opposition to the world of particularity, to the world of things. Things exist in variety and uniqueness. In order to see the world as oneness, one must see behind the particulars to that which all things share in common. Philosophy has given the name monism to the various spiritual and philosophical claims of oneness. When monism asserts the existence of oneness, it also tends to make a claim for the idea that the one exists in a way that monism considers more real than the things of the world. The one not only stands in opposition to things, but also to process, because the one exists as the unchanging, from which the changing emerges. Thus, an opposition emerges between the one and the particular, between change and stasis, between immanence and transcendence. For this reason, Sangsong correctly indicates that dualism emerges inevitably and inescapably from oneness or monism. There exists a koan in the Zen tradition which directly addresses this crucial point. It goes like this: "All things return to the one. To where does the one return?" The first half of the koan points to the transcendental one, the oneness of things, their common nature, which all things share. What does this oneness consist? First, immanence and finitude. All things have a history. They once did not exist, and at some time in the future they will cease to exist. Second, change. All things constantly undergo change as primal process. All things constantly display their nature as transformation. Third, interdependence. All things in existence emerge from the net of relationship and interdependent causation. They therefore have no essence and no underlying substance exists. Fourth, non-self. Because everything manifests in terms of interdependence, all things lack self-nature, essence, being, or substance. Fifth, compassion. All things manifest compassion as elemental display, because all things in existence co-create all other things. Sixth, particularity. Paradoxically, the transcendent nature of things manifests as their particularity. All things have in common their uniqueness. For this reason, oneness does not lie hidden or out of view, but displays itself, as Sangsong will say, right before our very eyes, present to our very ears. It might seem from the above that oneness names a good thing, that one could practically identify it with enlightenment. However, if we cling to oneness, we end up in the realm of the egoic one. The egoic one works like this: since all things are one, everyone should do things my way. The egoic one does not rest on the experience of oneness, but considers oneness only an idea. Clinging to this idea of oneness results in the erection of the citadel of being. Not understanding impermanence, finitude, process, and change, the gesture of clinging to oneness, by that very gesture of clinging, negates realization. Such a view of oneness becomes a nightmare of altruistic imposition, altruism as the destruction of other people for their own good. The mind does not have the capacity to understand oneness, only the heart can. Asking the mind to comprehend the transcendent resembles asking the gut to pump blood. It cannot do so no matter how hard it tries. The mind has the function of discrimination, and it cannot function otherwise. When the mind hears of the idea of oneness, it immediately divides the world into those who understand oneness and those who do not. For this reason, Sang Song states that from one mind comes duality. This explains why one must engage in a spiritual practice in order to awaken, that it always remains insufficient simply to think about the categories of understanding. No matter how brilliant and accurate the categories, the primal gesture of mind defeats the longing for transcendence until the heart awakens. This requires persistent practice and guidance. The second half of the koan asks the question, to where does the one return? This question counters the tendency to think of oneness as something hidden, to consider oneness as an essence behind the appearances of phenomena. The point of the question lies in the conflation of the notions of oneness and particularity, that form does not differ from oneness, and oneness does not differ from form. If you can answer this question, you then enter the realm of the transcendental many. Very few have written of the transcendental many, but manyness and transcendence do not differ. Rather, they name the same name. Those who have no experience with the transcendental many will hear this question and interpret it from the perspective of the egoic many. The egoic many believes in rugged individualism, in separation, in everyone for themselves. You are you, and I am I. I have my purposes, you have yours. Perhaps we can work together if our purposes coalesce, perhaps not. Just as the mind cannot understand the transcendental one, so also the mind cannot understand the transcendental many. In order to understand this kind of manyness, once again, one must engage in spiritual practice. When falling into the egoic many, the antidote appears as oneness. When falling into the egoic one, manyness appears as the antidote. For this reason, both parts of the koan form a perfect prescription and guide for moving from mind to heart and paving the way to realization.